The first thing I noticed wasn't the noise. It was the smell. Smoke, cold ash, and damp wool, like someone had tried to make a fire and failed. The scent clung to my doorway the way fear clings to a throat. I stood on my porch with my key half-turned, listening, and told myself it was probably a raccoon or wind or one of the neighborhood boys looking for trouble. Then a small shadow moved behind the curtain. Not a raccoon. I eased the key back slow as prayer and felt the old axe calluses on my palm remember what they were made for. My other hand slipped under my coat and found the iron hook of my woodcutter's hatchet. I didn't raise it, not yet, because the shadow behind the curtain had a child's shape, and in this valley children didn't come to a grown man's door unless something had already gone wrong. "Hello," my voice came out soft, like I didn't want to startle whatever was inside, like I was the guest. Silence answered, then a whisper of feet on my floorboards. The latch on my back window was broken. I knew it because I'd repaired it last winter after a storm loosened the nails. I stared at that tiny betrayal of wood and metal and thought, someone has been in here, someone is in here. I could call the constable. I could walk away and let the village handle it the way the village always handled things, loud, righteous, and cruel. But the child-shaped shadow stayed behind my curtain, trembling. And for reasons I couldn't name, that mattered more than my broken latch. I pushed the door open. A gust of stale air rolled out, warm from bodies that shouldn't have been there. My home was small, one room, a lean-to kitchen, and the loft where I slept. The hearth sat dead in the middle, the stones cold. A blanket I didn't own lay near it like a collapsed tent. My eyes adjusted, and that's when I saw her. She rose slowly from beside the hearth like a wolf standing up in a trap. Broad shoulders. Green skin dulled by soot, tusk tips peeking from a tight mouth. One hand held a knife, kitchen steel, not a soldier's blade, while the other stayed spread wide in front of two children huddled behind her legs, an orc. Not one of the raiders the songs warned us about, not the warband monsters people painted on tavern walls. This one looked like hunger had been winning for weeks. Her hair, black, thick, braided tight, was frayed at the ends like she'd been sleeping in brambles. One ear had a torn notch that never healed right. Her clothes were patched so many times the original fabric was hard to guess, and her boots were wrapped in rope where leather should have been. But her stance was a shield. I'd seen that stance once before. On the battlefield, when my friend Oren stepped between an arrow and a boy who wasn't even ours. The orc woman's eyes fixed on the hatchet at my side. Golden brown, sharp as flint, and full of the kind of calculation that comes from surviving people who enjoy hurting you. Behind her, the children peeked out. The older one, maybe 6, had the same green skin but softer, rounder cheeks. The younger was smaller, 4 at most, clinging to the older's shirt like it was the last rope over a cliff. Both had wide eyes and dirt on their faces and hands that looked too thin for winter. They weren't crying. That frightened me more than the knife. "Your house?" The orc woman asked. Her voice was low, roughened by cold nights, but the words were clear. She spoke our tongue like she'd learned it the hard way. "Yes," I said, "it is." Her knife didn't lift, but it didn't lower either. I kept my hands visible, slowly unhooked the hatchet from my belt and placed it on the floorboards near the door. Then I took one careful step inside. The children flinched. The orc woman's nostrils flared, catching my scent the way hunters do. Wood smoke, pine resin. Sweat from a long day's labor, not fear, not yet. "What are you doing in my home?" I asked. She swallowed once like the question scraped her throat. "Shelter. That's not an answer." "It is," she said, voice hardening, "for people who freeze." Her eyes flicked to the window, then back to me, like she expected torches any moment. I looked around. My chair had been moved closer to the hearth. The cupboard door was open. A few dried beans lay spilled near the table. My bread box was empty. They hadn't trashed the place. They hadn't stolen my tools. They'd just tried to survive. My anger rose and stalled like a cartwheel stuck in mud. I'd been robbed before by men, not orcs. Those men had laughed and left my pantry gutted, my bedding slashed just because they could. This woman looked like she'd chosen my house as a last resort. "Who are you?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "Draja," the older child whispered from behind her, voice trembling. "Mama," Draja glanced down, softening for a heartbeat. "Quiet Ven," so a mother, and somewhere out there a father-shaped hole. My mouth went dry. "Where is your husband?" Draja's eyes turned to stone. "Dead." The word landed heavy like a log dropped in snow. The younger child hiccuped, a small broken sound. Draja's hand reached back without looking, touching the child's head like reassurance, like promise. Something in my chest shifted because I knew that touch, that automatic protective motion. Widowhood makes you older overnight. I'd watched it happen to my own mother. I'd watched her shoulders become walls after my father died in the sawmill. "What happened?" I asked, quieter now. Draja's gaze sharpened again, wary of kindness the way starving men are wary of food that might be poisoned. We don't have time for stories. You're in my house, I said. We have time for the truth. Her fingers tightened on the knife. Truth gets people killed. Then choose your next words carefully, I replied, though my tone stayed calm. For a moment, the only sound was the soft crack of settling wood in the walls. Then Draja exhaled through her nose. My mate died on the road, sickness, then humans found us. I tensed. Found you? Yes, a bitter laugh, no humor in it. They said a widow is easier to take from. The older child then pressed his face into her hip. My stomach turned. I thought of men I'd shared ale with, men who spoke about orcs like they were animals. Men who believed anything not human didn't count as real suffering. What did they do? I asked, my voice rough now. Draja didn't answer directly. She lifted her chin, showing the bruise blooming under her jaw. They tried. My hands curled into fists before I could stop them. I forced them open. And you ran, I said. Draja's eyes flashed. I fought, then I ran because the children, her voice broke just once. She cleared her throat, angry at the weakness. Because they slow you. But you don't leave them. I stared at her, at those two little bodies behind her wrapped in rags, alive because she kept moving. My anger found a new target, not her, the village, the road men, the world that made a mother break into a stranger's house because it was the safer option. I looked at the cold hearth. You'll freeze tonight if you don't light that. We tried, Ven whispered, his voice shook. We couldn't, my eyes snapped to him. Kid flinched again, then forced himself still like he'd learned flinching invites worse. Did you get hurt? I asked. He shook his head quickly, then glanced at Draja as if asking permission to exist. I swallowed the sour taste in my mouth. Put the knife down. Draja didn't move. I nodded toward the hatchet by the door. I already did. A long moment. Then her knife lowered slowly, carefully, like it was part of her spine, and removing it hurt. She set it on the table, point facing away from me. Still, she didn't relax. I walked to the woodpile near the hearth and crouched. I'm going to start a fire. No one moved. I struck flint. Sparks jumped, caught on tinder, bloomed into a thin flame. I fed it gently, coaxing it the way you coax a frightened animal. The fire caught, then grew, warming the room in quick breaths. The younger child let out a sound halfway between relief and a sob. Draja's shoulders eased a fraction, just enough for me to see how exhausted she truly was. I stood, dusting my hands. I'm Bram, I said. This is my house. Draja gave a small nod, not gratitude, not trust, a note in a ledger. Bram, human might be dangerous. I turned to the cupboard and pulled out the last of my dried meat, then a sack of oats. I set them on the table. The children stared like I'd placed gold there. Draja's eyes narrowed. Why? Because you're starving. We can leave, she said quickly, suspicion rising. We don't want your pity. It's not pity, I replied. Food? Her jaw worked. Food has a price. Not tonight. She looked ready to argue, but the younger child, shaking, reached out with tiny fingers toward the meat. Ask, Draja snapped, harsh from fear. The little one's eyes welled. Please, I slid the meat closer. Eat. Ven didn't move until Draja did. She took a strip and broke it in half, handing pieces to both children first. Only after they were chewing, slow, reverent, did she taste a small bite herself, as if to prove it wasn't poisoned. I watched and felt something inside me bruise, because I'd been hungry. But I'd never been hungry with children depending on me. The fire crackled. Outside, wind hissed through bare branches. Inside my home, an orc widow and two kids ate my food like it was the first kindness they'd met in a long time. And I realized, with a chill deeper than winter, that if my neighbors found them here, my door wouldn't just be knocked on, it would be kicked in. They slept curled near the hearth, the children tucked into Draja's arms like pups. I gave them my blanket and took my coat to the loft. But sleep wouldn't stick to me. My thoughts kept circling the same questions like crows. How had they reached my house? Why my house? And how long until someone noticed? At dawn, I climbed down quietly. The fire had died to embers. Frost rimmed the inside of my window. Draja was already awake, sitting upright with the knife back in her hand, awake the way soldiers are awake with no softness left to steal. Her gaze tracked me. Morning, I nodded. Morning. Ven and the younger one, Lessa, I later learned were still asleep, faces smudged, breaths shallow but even. Draja's eyes flicked to the hatchet by the door. You could have killed us. I know, I said. Why didn't you? I shrugged, but the motion felt too small for the question. Because you're not raiders, because they're children. Because I've seen what the world does to widows. Her expression hardened. Humans also make widows. So do orcs, I replied, a spark of respect, tiny, unwilling, flickered in her eyes. She didn't like humans, but she hated lies more. You're alone, she observed. Yes. No wife? No. Why? I exhaled. Because the last time I tried to build a life, war burned it down. Her eyes softened for a second. War burns everything. We sat in the quiet, two strangers with too much past. Then a distant sound broke the stillness, voices outside getting closer. My blood turned to ice. Draja tensed, eyes darting, knife ready. I moved to the window and peered through the frost. Two men on the road, village men. One carried a sack, the other swung a stick as he walked, hitting shrubs for no reason. Bren and Hal, I knew them. I'd drunk with them once. Stopped after I heard the way they talked about green-skinned vermin. They were coming straight toward my house. Draja saw the change in my face. "They're looking," I held up a hand. "Stay here, keep the children quiet." She didn't argue. She scooped Lessa into her lap and shook Ven gently awake. Ven's eyes went wide, instantly alert. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. Cold air slapped my face. I forced my features into a neutral mask as Bren and Hal approached. Bren grinned. "Morning, Bram. Thought we'd check on you. Heard something in the night." I leaned casually against my doorframe, blocking the view inside. "Did you?" Hal sniffed the air, smelled smoke, thought maybe your chimney was on fire again. It was. Bren's gaze slid past me, trying to peer through gaps. "You got company?" My heart thudded hard enough to hurt. I smiled anyway. "No." Hal stepped closer, his eyes narrowed. "We had trouble on the road yesterday, tracks, big ones." I kept my smile. "Plenty of big tracks, deer, bears, not those kind." Bren's grin sharpened. "Orc kind." I didn't move, but my skin prickled. Hal tapped his stick on my porch slow. "Constable S asking, an orc woman, two brats, stole food from the market wagon." My stomach dropped because now I knew the story the village would tell. Not hungry widow, not refugees, thieves, vermin. Bren leaned closer. "If you see anything, you tell us, we'll handle it." I met his eyes. "How will you handle it?" Bren laughed. "Like we handle pests." A hot flare rose in me, bright and dangerous. I forced it down. "I haven't seen anyone," I said evenly. Hal's gaze lingered on my door. "Mind if we take a look just to be sure?" My mouth went dry. If I refused, they'd push harder. If I let them in, no, I said. Bren's grin vanished. "Excuse me, my house," I repeated. "You're not coming in." Hal's hand tightened on his stick. "You hiding something?" I stepped off the porch then, putting myself between them and the door, stance wide, steady. "You can call the constable if you want." "I'll tell him the same." For a moment, the three of us held still. The wind whistled through bare branches. Somewhere a crow called. Bren's eyes narrowed into slits. "You've been alone too long, Bram. Makes you soft." "Or makes me smart," I replied. Hal spat into the snow. "Fine, but if you're lying, we'll know." They turned and walked away, but Bren looked back once, and the look he gave my door was not curiosity. It was hunger. I waited until they disappeared down the road before I went back inside. Draja was standing, knife raised, children behind her again. "They will return," she said. "Yes," I admitted, "probably with more." Her nostrils flared. "We have to go." I glanced at the children, at their thin faces, at the frost thickening on my window. "If you go back into the woods," I said, "you'll die." Draja's jaw tightened. "Better than being caught." I stared at her. "No, better for you maybe, not for them." Her eyes flicked to Ven and Lessa, and something like pain crossed her face. I took a slow breath. "Listen, there's an old hunting cabin up on Ridgeway, half a day's walk. It's mine too, technically. No one goes there this time of year." Draja's gaze sharpened. "Why tell me?" "Because it's safer than here." "And what do you get?" "Peace," I said, "and maybe fewer ghosts." She didn't understand that last part, but she didn't need to. I grabbed a sack and began filling it. Oats, dried meat, a small jar of salt, matches, a wool scarf. Then I pulled down my spare cloak and laid it over Lessa's shoulders. The child blinked up at me, startled. Ven's eyes stayed suspicious, but beneath it I saw something else, hope trying not to show itself. Draja watched my hands the whole time, like she expected me to snatch the sack back at the last moment. When I finished, I met her gaze. "I'll take you there," she stiffened. "No, we go alone. You don't know the path, and if those men are hunting you," I shook my head. "I can lead you around the main trails." Her jaw flexed. "And if you lead us into a trap, then you can stab me," I said simply. "But if you refuse and you get caught, they won't stab you, they'll do worse." Her eyes flashed. She hated the truth, but she recognized it. Finally, she nodded once. "We go now." We left just after sunrise. I told the village I was going to cut timber near the ridge, ordinary work. No one questioned it. People don't look too hard at a man they assume has nothing worth stealing. Draja and the children followed behind me in the trees, quiet as shadows. Ven stepped where Draja stepped. Lessa held Draja's hand, stumbling sometimes over roots. Halfway up the ridge, snow began to fall, fine and relentless. It made the forest seem quieter, like the world was holding its breath. I kept listening for voices, dogs, anything. At one point, Lessa tripped and fell hard. She didn't cry, just clenched her teeth, a tiny soldier. My throat tightened. I crouched beside her. Are you hurt? She shook her head, cheeks red. I pulled her up gently. You're brave. Her eyes widened as if she'd never heard that word directed at her. Then she looked quickly at her mother as if checking whether it was allowed. Draja's gaze held mine, not gratitude, still not that, but something less sharp than before. We reached the cabin by late afternoon. It was a squat structure of logs and moss, half buried in snowdrifts, its chimney crooked but intact. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside smelled of old pine and dust. Draja scanned the room like a warrior, checking corners, windows, the loft. It's safe, I said. For now, she replied. I lit the small stove. Warmth began to spread. The children explored with cautious curiosity, touching the rough walls, peering into a wooden trunk. Ven found an old carved toy bear I'd forgotten I owned and held it like it might bite. You can keep it, I told him. He stared at me. Why? Because it's lonely up here, I said. It'll be less lonely if you have it. He didn't smile, but he hugged it tight. Draja watched that too. You could leave us here and forget, she said quietly when the kids were distracted. I nodded. I could, but you won't. It wasn't a question. I looked at the fire. No, I won't. Why? Her voice was softer, but the suspicion still lived in it. Humans don't do things without reason. I thought of the village men, their hungry look, their talk of pests. I thought of my mother alone being offered help that wasn't help at all. And I thought of the way Draja stood like a wall in front of her children. Because the world already decided you don't matter, I said, and I hate when the world makes that decision. Draja's throat bobbed. You don't even know me. I know enough, I said. For the first time, her knife hand loosened, just a little. Over the next week, I brought supplies every other day. I told the village I was trapping and checking my lines. No one questioned it. Men like Bren and Hal assumed a lone woodcutter's routines were too boring to scrutinize, but I knew they were watching. One evening, as I approached the cabin, I found tracks, boot tracks, human, not mine. My pulse spiked. I moved silently, circling wide, approaching from the uphill side where the wind carried my scent away. When I reached the cabin window, I saw them. Bren and Hal inside, standing over the hearth like they owned it. Draja was pressed against the wall, knife in hand, children behind her, eyes wild. Bren's voice carried through the thin logs. Look at that, found yourself a cozy little nest, didn't you? Hal laughed. Told you she'd be hiding near Bram's land. Humans like him always have a soft spot for filth. Draja's voice was low, shaking with fury. Leave. Bren stepped closer, grin cruel. Or what? You'll stab us, then what? 2 human men dead, 1 orc widow standing over them. The village will tear you apart. Hal leaned toward the kids. And those brats, we could sell them. Orc blood fetches coin with the right buyers. My vision went red, not rage like fire, rage like ice. I didn't charge in screaming. Screaming is what fools do. I slid my bow from my shoulder, knocked an arrow, and aimed through the cracked window seam. My hands were steady, because war had taught me what to do when monsters speak. I loosed. The arrow slammed into the cabin wall beside Bren's head, burying itself deep enough to make the whole log shudder. Both men froze. My voice cut through the silence like a blade. Step away from them. Their heads snapped toward the window. I kicked the door open and entered, bow drawn again, arrow knocked, eyes locked on Bren's chest. Hal's stick dropped to the floor. Bren's grin faltered for the first time. Bram, you, I said, step away. Bren lifted his hands slowly, fake innocence in his posture. Easy, we're just checking, Constable said. Constable didn't send you, I interrupted. You came because you thought you could take what you wanted. Hal's face flushed. You can't protect an orc, the village can choke on its fear, I snapped, surprising even myself. Draja stared at me, shock flickering across her face. Ven clung to her, trembling. Bren's eyes narrowed. You're choosing them over your own kind. I took one step closer. I'm choosing what's right. Bren's lip curled. Right, she's an orc, they're people, I said, voice hard. Silence fell like a hammer, then Bren laughed low and mean. You think you're a hero, all you are is a fool, this won't end here. I drew the bowstring tighter. Leave now. For a moment he looked like he might rush me, but Hal grabbed his sleeve, fear overtaking pride. They backed toward the door. Bren paused at the threshold, eyes flicking to Draja. Enjoy your borrowed safety, widow, it always runs out. Then they were gone, footsteps crunching away into snow. I did lower my bow until the forest swallowed their sound. Draja exhaled shakily. The children clung to her like drowning sailors. I turned to her. Are you hurt? She shook her head, but her eyes were bright, angry, and wet. Why? She whispered. Why risk yourself? I lowered the bow and set it down. My voice came out quieter. Because if I let them do this, I'll be no better than they are. Her jaw trembled as she fought emotion like it was an enemy. Then to my surprise, she bowed her head slightly, not submission, respect, and that changed something between us. The next day, the constable came to my house. I saw him from the window, Constable Marr, a thick man with a heavy coat and heavier suspicion. Behind him stood Bren, smirking, and Hal, eyes darting. I opened the door before they could knock. Marr's eyes swept me. Bram, Constable, he nodded toward the road. We need to talk. Bren cut in, voice loud. He's hiding them. I saw tracks going up the ridge. Marr raised a hand to silence him, but his eyes stayed sharp on me. There are rumors. Of course there are, I said calmly. Marr stepped closer. They say you're sheltering an orc widow and her spawn. I didn't flinch, do they? Marr's gaze searched my face. Are you? I could lie, pretend ignorance, hope they'd leave. But Bren's grin told me it wouldn't end, not until he got what he wanted. So I did the only thing that might save Draja and the kids. I told the truth in a way the village couldn't swallow easily. Yes, I said. Hal gasped like I'd confessed to murder. Bren's grin widened triumphantly. Marr's brows rose. You admit it. I do, I said, and you can arrest me if you want. Marr's expression darkened. Do you know what you're doing? People are afraid. People are cruel, I replied. Marr's jaw tightened. The council will demand action. Then bring the council, I said. I'll tell them why. Bren laughed. He's gone mad. Marr studied me a long moment as if weighing something heavier than law. Then he said quietly, where are they? I met his gaze. Safe. Marr's eyes narrowed. Bram, I won't give them to Bren, I said, voice cold. If you're here to protect them, we can talk. If you're here to hand them to men like that, I nodded at Bren, then you'll have to go through me. For a moment, I thought Marr might strike me. Instead, he exhaled slowly, a tired sound. You're making enemies. I've had enemies before, I said. Marr looked at Bren and Hal. Go back to the village. Bren sputtered. What constable? Go, Marr repeated, voice like iron. Bren's face twisted with rage, but he obeyed, dragging Hal away. When they were gone, Marr stepped closer, voice low. Are they dangerous? No, I said. They're hungry, they're scared, they're running. Marr's gaze softened just a fraction. And you're sure they didn't steal? I hesitated. They took food from a wagon maybe, not for greed, for survival. Marr rubbed his jaw. Council won't care why. Then maybe the council needs reminding what mercy looks like. Marr stared at me, then shook his head like I was impossible. You want to bring an orc into our valley and expect peace? I want 2 children to live, I said simply. Marr's eyes flicked away, troubled. If the council decides, there will be a hunt. And I won't be able to stop it. I felt cold spread through me. How long? 2 days. Council meets at midweek. That gave me 1 day to do something no one else wanted to do, make the village see orcs as people, or get Draja and the kids out before the valley became a trap. Marr held my gaze. Whatever you decide, Bram, decide fast. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me on my porch with the weight of the next choice crushing my ribs. That night I went to the cabin and told Draja everything. Her face went pale beneath green skin. They will hunt. Yes. We leave, she said immediately, already gathering the children's things. I grabbed her wrist gently. If you run now, they'll chase you, and winter will kill you before they do. Draja's eyes flashed. Then what, you think we can stand in front of your council and ask for kindness? I met her gaze. Not ask, show. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. I knelt in front of Ven and Lessa, who were watching silently. Do you trust me? I asked them. Ven's eyes flicked to his mother. Draja's jaw clenched, torn. Lessa whispered, you gave blanket. I nodded. Yes, Ven swallowed. You shot Wall, not us. I nodded again. Yes. He hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. A little, Draja exhaled, defeated by their hope. What is your plan, Bram? I stood. Tomorrow you come with me, not to the council hall, too many would panic. You come to my house. In daylight with me beside you, where the village can see you without torches and shouting. Draja's eyes widened. They will kill us. They won't, I said, not if I do it right. And if you do it wrong, she asked, voice sharp. I didn't lie. Then we all pay. Silence filled the cabin. Then Draja looked down at her children, at the way they clung to her, and finally nodded. Then we go, she said, but if I smell betrayal, you won't, I promised. Not from me. She studied me a long time. Then almost too quietly to hear, she said, my mate's name was Korg. I blinked. Why tell me that? Because, she said, voice thick, if I die tomorrow, someone should know I was his, that I was not just an orc. The words hit me like a fist. I nodded slowly. I'll remember. And I meant it. The next morning, I walked into the village with an orc widow and 2 children behind me. Heads turned, mouths fell open. A woman dropped her basket. Apples rolled across the snow. Someone shouted orc, someone else screamed, kill it. Ven flinched and grabbed Draja's hand. Lessa buried her face in her mother's cloak. Draja's shoulders rose like she was bracing for arrows. I lifted my voice. Stop! My shout cut through the panic just enough for people to hesitate. Bren pushed through the crowd like a dog smelling blood. There, I told you he brought them here. Men began to gather, farmers with pitchforks, hunters with bows, the kind of mob that thinks fear makes it righteous. I stepped in front of Draja and the kids. You want them, I said loudly. You go through me. Bren laughed, gladly. He started forward and then stepped out from behind Draja, small, thin, shaking, but he stepped out. Everyone froze, surprised. Ven's voice trembled, but it carried. We didn't want trouble. A murmur rippled. Bren sneered. Shut up, brat. Ven flinched, but he didn't retreat. He looked around at the crowd, eyes wide and wet. My papa died. Mama tried to keep us alive. We were hungry. A woman in the crowd, old Mrs. Hender, clutched her shawl tighter, eyes softening. Bren snapped, lies, orcs don't. My sister was cold, Ven continued, voice cracking. Mama gave her own cloak, she shivered all night. The crowd shifted, discomfort creeping in where hatred used to sit easily, because it's hard to call a child a monster when he's talking about being cold. Draja's eyes widened, shocked her son was speaking. She reached out as if to pull him back, but I saw something in her face then, pride breaking through terror. Ven swallowed hard. Bram gave us food, he didn't hurt us, we don't want to hurt you. Silence fell, heavy and tense. Bren's face twisted. You're being tricked, orcs. Draja stepped forward then, voice low but strong. If I wanted your blood, human, I would not bring my children into your streets. Her gaze swept the crowd. I am Draja, widow of Korg. I crossed half a kingdom to keep these two alive. I have no warband, no weapons, only a knife and my breath. A hunter raised his bow slightly. I raised my hand, stopping him. Look at them, I said, voice steady. Look with your eyes, not your stories. People stared. Some saw what they expected, green skin, tusks, fear. But others saw what was real, exhaustion, hunger, children holding onto a mother like she was the last safe thing in the world. Constable Mar arrived then, pushing through the crowd, face grim. Enough, the mob quieted, uncertain under authority. Mar looked at Draja and the kids, then at me, then at Bren, whose eyes gleamed with rage. Mar cleared his throat. Council meets tomorrow, he called. Until then, no one lays a hand on anyone, that's an order. Bren shouted, you can't protect them forever. Mar's gaze hardened. Maybe not, but I can stop you from starting a riot. The crowd murmured, some relieved, some angry. Mar stepped close to me, voice low. This is madness. Maybe, I whispered back, but it's honest madness. Mar looked at the children, his eyes flicked to Lessa, shivering, cheeks red. For a moment his face softened, then he sighed, bring them to my office, I'll arrange temporary shelter under guard. Draja stiffened. Guard, to keep others out, Mar said quickly, not to keep you in. Draja's eyes narrowed, distrustful. I stepped closer. It's safer than my house right now, I murmured. After a long moment, Draja nodded. As they walked through the crowd, some villagers spat, others stared. One woman quietly offered a small loaf of bread and then immediately looked away like she was ashamed of her own kindness. Draja accepted it without pride, without shame, only survival. And something shifted in the valley that day, not enough, but something. That night Bren gathered men. I knew because I saw them from my window, shadows moving, whispers, weapons hidden under cloaks. Fear had turned into certainty, and certainty was always worse. I went to Mar's office, pounding on the door. Mar opened it, eyes tired. Bram, they're planning something, I said. Mar's expression tightened. I know. You're going to stop it, Mar hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. The law was one man, the mob was a dozen. I felt cold settle in my bones. Then I will, Mar grabbed my arm. Don't be a fool, you'll die. I've died before, I said quietly. This is just the part where my body catches up. Mar stared at me, then released my arm, jaw working. If you do this, there's no going back. I nodded. Good. I walked out into the snow toward the barn where Bren's men were gathering, and I realized I wasn't afraid, not of them, not of dying. I was afraid of doing nothing, because doing nothing is how monsters win without ever swinging a blade. The barn doors were cracked open. I heard Bren's voice inside, excited and cruel. We take them tonight, he hissed. No council, no speeches. We drag the orc out, teach Bram a lesson for siding with filth, then we're heroes. A chorus of agreement. My hand tightened on my bow, then I stepped into the barn, every head turned. Bren's grin widened. Look who came, the savior. Men shifted, hands on weapons. I didn't draw my bow. I simply said, if you go to Mar's office tonight, you will die. They laughed. Bren stepped forward, eyes gleaming. Big words. I met his gaze. Not words, warning. Hal, pale, nervous, swallowed. Bram, don't. Bren shoved him aside. He won't do anything, he's alone. I nodded. Yes, I said. I am. Then I whistled. A sharp, piercing sound. From outside, a deeper sound answered, growling. The barn doors burst open wider and three shapes surged in my hunting dogs, big and fierce, trained to protect my trap lines from wolves. They bared teeth, eyes locked on Bren. The men stumbled back, suddenly less brave. Bren's face went tight. "You brought dogs," I shrugged. "You brought a mob." The dogs snarled ready. Bren lifted his pitchfork. "Call them off. Not until you swear," I said, voice cold, "that you will leave Draja and her children alone." Bren spat. "Never," I nodded once. "Then I guess we find out which of us is bluffing." The barn went deadly quiet, because everyone suddenly understood this wasn't a tavern argument, this was a line drawn in snow. Hal's voice shook. "Bren, maybe." Bren lunged. And one of the dogs snapped forward, teeth closing on Bren's arm with a crunching force that made him scream. Chaos erupted. Men shouted, weapons lifted, dogs lunged. I moved like I was back in war, fast, controlled, brutal. I didn't kill, but I broke courage. I drove them back with arrows into rafters, with dogs snapping at ankles, with my own body between them and the door. Bren fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding arm, eyes wild. I stepped close, bow lowered, voice like iron. "If you try again," I said quietly, "I won't aim at walls." Bren's face twisted with hatred. "You can't protect them forever." I leaned in. "No," I murmured, "but I can protect them long enough." Then I turned and left, taking my dogs with me, leaving the barn full of men who just learned monsters don't always have green skin. The next day the council met. They expected me to be humiliated. They expected the orc widow to be dragged in chains, a spectacle. Instead, Draja walked in under Mar's escort, head-high, children at her sides, and I walked beside her. The council hall was full. Villagers packed the benches, whispers like insects. The elders sat at the front, faces stern. Elder Tam leaned forward. "Bram, you have caused unrest." "Yes," I said, "you have brought an orc into our valley," another elder snapped, "endangering us." "They're not endangering you," I replied, "you're endangering them." A murmur surged, angry. Elder Tam's gaze narrowed. "Orcs have raided our borders for generations." Draja's voice cut in calm. "Humans have raided ours." Silence, shock. Elder Tam reddened. "You speak in our hall." Draja's eyes didn't flinch. "If you will judge me, you will hear me." The elder's jaw worked. He glanced at Mar, who gave a small nod, permission. Draja stepped forward, voice steady. "My mate died of sickness. I did not bring war, I brought grief, I brought children. I came through your lands because winter is cruel and roads are crueler." She looked at the crowd. "Men tried to take me, men tried to take my children. I fought, I ran, I hid." Her gaze landed on Bren in the crowd, arm bandaged, face dark. "I stole food," she admitted. "Yes, because children cannot eat pride." A murmur, some angry, some uneasy. Ven stepped forward then, small but brave. "My sister was cold," he said again, voice wavering. "Mama gave her cloak, Bram gave us fire." The hall stilled because now it wasn't an orc problem. It was a child talking about fire. Elder Tam cleared his throat, voice harder. "What do you want?" Draja's jaw clenched. "To live." "To stay," an elder scoffed. Draja hesitated. The valley's hatred pressed down on her like a weight. Then she said quietly, "I want a place where my children can sleep without knives in the dark." My chest tightened. I stepped forward. "I'll vouch for them," I said. "They can stay on my land, work with me. I'll feed them, shelter them, and if they cause harm, you can hold me responsible." Gasps. Elder Tam's eyes narrowed. "You would bind yourself to an orc widow?" "Yes," I said, "not marriage, not yet, but I felt the word bind settle somewhere deep anyway." "And if the village refuses?" an elder asked. "Then," I said, voice calm, "I will take them out of this valley myself, and you can explain to whatever god you pray to why you chase children into winter." The hall erupted in murmurs, anger, and discomfort. Elder Tam slammed his staff. "Silence," he glared at me, "you threaten us." "I warn you," I corrected. The elders whispered among themselves, tense. Finally, Elder Tam raised his head. "We will not allow an orc to live among us freely." My heart sank. "But," he added, voice reluctant, "we will allow them to stay temporarily on Bram's land under strict conditions. No travel into the village without escort, no weapons. Any theft or violence and they are expelled." Relief surged through me, sharp and dizzy. Draja's jaw tightened, pride wounded, but she looked down at her children and her pride folded into something softer. "We accept," she said quietly. The council banged their staffs, sealing the decision. The village didn't cheer, but they didn't riot, not today, and sometimes that's how change begins, not with applause but with a fragile ceasefire. Months passed. Winter loosened its grip. Snow melted into mud. Buds appeared on branches like the world daring to hope. Draja and the children moved into my house. At first, it was awkward. My home felt too small for four bodies, too quiet for children's laughter, too haunted for a woman who still slept with a knife under her pillow. But gradually the house changed, not in big dramatic ways, in small ones, a carved bear on the shelf, a tiny pair of boots by the hearth, a stew pot always simmering. Ven learned to chop kindling, grinning when he did it right. Lessa learned the names of birds and ran after them laughing, fearless when the sun was out. Draja worked harder than anyone I'd ever known. She fixed my broken latch better than I had. She planted a small garden behind the house. She mended my shirts with stitches so neat I felt embarrassed by my own clumsy patches. She didn't thank me often. Orc pride is thick. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, she'd look at me across the table, eyes less sharp, and I'd feel something like warmth bloom in my chest. The village watched, some with hatred, some with curiosity, a few with reluctant respect. Bren avoided me, but his eyes still carried poison. I knew it wasn't over. Change never ends clean. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I found Draja sitting on my porch watching Ven and Lessa chase each other in the yard. Her face was calm. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked less like a trapped wolf. I sat beside her. We watched the children in silence for a while, then Draja spoke, voice quiet. Korg used to say the world is made of doors. I glanced at her. Doors? Yes, she nodded toward the yard. Some open, some close, some you have to break. I smiled faintly. Sounds like a stubborn man. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. He was. We fell silent again. Then she said so softly I almost missed it. You didn't break our door, Bram, you opened it. My throat tightened. I looked at her, really looked, not as orc widow, not as problem. As a woman who had carried grief and fear like stones and still found strength to love her children. I'm glad I did, I said. Draja's gaze held mine, steady now, not afraid. Then she leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine, a simple touch, but it felt like a promise. Behind us, the children laughed, free and bright. And I realized the thing that had changed everything wasn't the danger or the council or the fight. It was this. A door that should have been locked had opened. And the world, for once, had been forced to become bigger.